On a chilly December night in 1991, in the city of Austin, Texas, 4 teenage girls closed up a frozen yogurt shop and prepared to go home. What should have been an ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that has haunted an entire community for more than 3 decades. The shop was called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, a small, cheerful store in a busy shopping center. But in the early hours of December 7th, firefighters responded to flames coming from the store. When they put out the fire, they discovered a scene so shocking that it would mark one of the darkest chapters in Austin's history. 4 young girls, Amy Ayers, 13, Eliza Thomas, 17, Jennifer Harbison, 17, and Sarah Harbison, 15, had been murdered. The shop was set on fire in what seemed like an attempt to destroy evidence. In the years that followed, investigators chased leads, made arrests, secured confessions, and even convicted suspects. Yet every step forward seemed to fall apart. DNA evidence cleared the men who were convicted. The community demanded answers. Families of the victims were left waiting for justice that seemed like it would never come. And then, more than 3 decades later, technology finally caught up with the case. Using advanced genealogy, investigators identified a man they believe was responsible. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers, and he had already escaped justice in life, dying by suicide in 1999. This is the story of one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, the yogurt shop murders. In 1991, Austin, Texas, was a growing city. It had a reputation for being vibrant, youthful, and full of promise. But beneath the surface, the city, like any other, was not immune to crime. The 4 victims were ordinary teenagers, each with unique dreams and personalities. Jennifer Harbison, 17, and her younger sister Sarah, 15, were inseparable. Jennifer worked at the yogurt shop and was responsible for closing duties that night. Sarah was visiting, keeping her company. Eliza Thomas, 17, was Jennifer's friend and co-worker. She was also there to help close the store. Amy Ayers, 13, the youngest of the group, was a friend of Sarah's and had tagged along for a fun night. For their families, these girls represented hope, love, and bright futures. None of them could have imagined that a simple shift at a yogurt shop would end so tragically. That evening, customers came and went as usual. Witnesses later reported seeing the girls working and laughing together. They were scheduled to close the shop by midnight. At 11:47 p.m., the last receipt was printed from the cash register. This detail would later become an important timestamp for investigators. By the early hours of December 7th, a police officer patrolling the area noticed smoke rising from the strip mall. Firefighters arrived quickly and forced their way inside the yogurt shop. What they found inside was devastating. The store was on fire, and once the flames were put out, the bodies of the 4 girls were discovered. The fire had damaged evidence, but it was clear to investigators that this was not an accident. The girls had been bound, gagged, and murdered before the fire was set. The city of Austin was stunned. A quadruple homicide of teenagers in a public business was almost unthinkable. From the very beginning, investigators faced challenges. The fire had destroyed much of the physical evidence, and the crime scene was chaotic. Still, detectives pursued multiple leads. They questioned store employees, customers, and anyone seen near the shop that night. Several people were brought in for questioning, but no solid suspects emerged. The case quickly grew cold. But the community's demand for answers put immense pressure on law enforcement. Years later, in the late 1990s, investigators zeroed in on 4 young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. Interrogations were long and intense. Eventually, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen confessed to being involved. But their confessions were inconsistent, and critics argued they were coerced under pressure. Still, prosecutors pressed forward. In 1999, charges were filed. Robert Springsteen was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to death. Michael Scott was convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life in prison. The other 2 suspects, Pierce and Wellborn, were never convicted but remained tied to the case in the public's mind. For a moment, it seemed like justice had been served. But then came the breakthrough that changed everything: DNA testing. When DNA evidence from the crime scene was tested, it did not match any of the 4 men. In 2009, after years in prison, Both Scott and Springsteen were released. The convictions were overturned. The community was left shocked again. If not them, then who? For decades, the yogurt shop murders hung over the city. The case became a dark part of Austin's history. The families of the victims were forced to relive the pain every time the case was mentioned in the media. For them, the lack of closure was unbearable. Every year, on the anniversary of the murders, vigils were held to honor the girls. People left flowers, notes, and prayers outside the site of the former yogurt shop. The question always remained the same. Who killed Amy, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah? In 2024, more than 30 years after the murders, investigators finally announced a major development. Using advanced DNA testing and genetic genealogy, they were able to identify a suspect, Robert Eugene Brashers. Brashers was no stranger to law enforcement. He was a career criminal, connected to a string of violent crimes across the country. Tragically, he had already died by suicide in 1999, years before the technology could catch him. Investigators compared his DNA to the evidence preserved from the yogurt shop crime scene. The match was confirmed. After decades of confusion, wrongful convictions, and unanswered questions, the name of the true suspect finally came to light. Brashers lived a life marked by violence and instability. He had been connected to multiple crimes in different states, including sexual assaults and burglaries. He was described as manipulative and dangerous. In 1999, when police attempted to arrest him for unrelated crimes, he took his own life. At the time, no one realized he was connected to the Austin murders. Only with the rise of forensic genealogy, a method that uses DNA databases and family trees, could investigators finally link him to the yogurt shop murders. Even with the identification of Brashers, questions linger. Did he act alone? Were others involved that night? Could earlier arrests and confessions have been influenced by local pressure to solve the case quickly? For some, the naming of Brashers brings closure. For others, it feels like only part of the story has been revealed. The yogurt shop murders case is a tragic example of how difficult major investigations can be. It highlights the danger of relying too heavily on confessions without solid evidence, the importance of preserving evidence for future testing, the role of new technologies, like genetic genealogy, in solving cold cases. For the families of the victims, the identification of Brashers is bittersweet. On one hand, they finally have a name and an answer. On the other, justice can never fully be served, because the suspect is already gone. Still, the announcement brought a measure of closure to a case that haunted Austin for more than 3 decades. The yogurt shop murders remain one of the darkest chapters in Austin's history. For young girls, full of life and potential, had their futures stolen in the most unimaginable way. For years, the case was marked by confusion, controversy, and injustice. Innocent men were convicted, only to be released. Families waited decades for clarity. And finally, thanks to modern science, the truth emerged. The name Robert Eugene Brashers will forever be tied to this case. But the story doesn't end there. The case raises larger questions about justice, technology, and the importance of never giving up hope. As we look back, one question remains for all of us. If it took more than 30 years to solve this case, how many other cold cases might still be waiting for answers in the shadows? So, what do you think? Was Robert Brashers acting alone? Or were there others involved that night? Let us know in the comments below.